So I am thrilled today to get a chance to be in conversation with Pam Gregory. And before we start, let me just read your bio and then we'll get into our conversation. Pam Gregory is an internationally known astrologer who was blessed to stumble across the subject when she was 22. She has a very busy YouTube channel, Pam Gregory Astrology, and through her website, pamgregory.com, she offers teaching videos and a detailed monthly newsletter. And her main focus is how we can use astrology strategically to live better and bigger lives. She's the author of 2 books. You Don't Really Believe in Astrology, Do You? How Astrology Can Reveal Profound Patterns in Your Life, and How to Co-Create Using the Secret Language of the Universe, Using Astrology for Your Empowerment. And I'll also say, Pam, I truly have incredible respect for the depth and breadth of your understanding of astrology, for your spiritual perspective on the energies of the sky and how it can guide us in this time, and the way in which I really feel through your teaching, you're guiding us to live from the heart and from a higher level of consciousness, which is truly profound. So
Oh,
thank
bless
you.
you. I feel very touched by that, Heather. Thank you, because I respect and admire your work so much, because you're dealing with massive evolutionary cycles of consciousness, and that's what we need to look at. We need to look at that big picture too. So, we've all got a different piece of the puzzle. So thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you.
So you and I both have a sense that this is a turbulent year on the planet. And part of what I really am impressed with is your depth of understanding of the Saturn-Uranus square that we're in, that we've been in all of last year and will be through this year. But you talk a lot about how this year Uranus will be the stronger energy in that square. Can you say a little bit more about your sense of that?
Yes, I think it's partly because the nodes have moved into Taurus and Scorpio. So we now have the North Node in Taurus, which is going to strengthen Uranus. They are now co-present, if you like, in Taurus. And Uranus is actually conjunct 2 of the eclipses, one on the 30th of April and the other very important one, I think it's the 8th of November, which I understand is your election. It's that midterm elections in the US. So, and I think the first one is at 10 of Taurus. The lunar eclipse on the 8th of November is at 16 of Taurus, both conjunct Uranus. So that is really going to highlight that kind of eruptive, unexpected quality of Uranus. And also in the middle of the year, last week of July, first week of August, we have a triple conjunction, and you'll be very aware, Heather, of Mars, Uranus, North Node coming together, which again is a very potentially inflammatory, combustible, eruptive, explosive, unexpected event or events of some kind. We never quite know how it will play out, but the energy is very high at that time. And of course, as you and I both know, Uranus has a wonderful part to play in a way, because although it's very destabilizing, particularly in Taurus, which is fixed earth and wants to keep things the same and steady, they're not easy bedfellows at all. Uranus is the planet of awakening. It's the planet of the higher mind. It's the planet of the galactics. So we are in a very forced time of evolution, a very speedy kind of quantum leap time of evolution, because again, as we know, Uranus is never a linear, steady, gradual energy. It's always in jumps. It's quanta, it's quantum leaps. And that's why I think this year, although it's very turbulent and unstable, it's actually an acceleration of our evolution at this time. And we just have to very consciously decide which side of Uranus we're going to be on. Are we going to be in the drama of the 3D that it may be creating? Or are we going to choose that higher path of this is all about my awakening, and that is what I'm going to focus on. And also, if I may just say, and we haven't discussed this, Heather, but I have a very strong sense that Uranus, particularly in Taurus, can bring in, because it's connected to geomagnetics, the magnetism of the Earth, etc., as we know, it can be associated with a sudden shift of a solar flash, a massive solar storm, a M-class, X-class flare, solar storm, which can be massive but can change the whole game, can flip the board, can change everything, can burn off a lot of this old dense energy in a moment. So it may well be, because Uranus is all speedy, isn't it? It goes very quickly. And of course, we can never predict when such an event would occur, because it's the planet of surprises and would never want us to know. It has to be unexpected. But I think it has that potential, with the drop in the magnetic shields and the local cloud, that we could get an absolute whammy of a coronal mass ejection, which will change our world. And it could even move us into a period where we don't even have any memory of the past, I want to say. How do you feel about that, Heather?
Oh, that's fascinating, that last part to think about, because, as we've talked before, I really am fascinated with the larger cycles that we're in, the precessional cycle, and the way in which every midpoint of the precessional cycle and the ending and beginning of a new one, where we are right now, is a time of extreme change in consciousness and earth changes. And we know that historically, looking at shifts that have happened on the planet in that 12,000 year cycle. And the precessional cycle in full is 24,000 years. So I really think that is the profound shift that we're in, and that it is associated with what's going on the planet right now, with the lessening of the magnetic shields, the increase in cosmic energies and solar energies that we're experiencing. So I do think this is leading to these profound shifts in consciousness and in the earth changes that we're experiencing. But that's fascinating to think that it could actually, well, I think we both are very interested in Rory Duff's work and his sense that we're moving into a higher frequency. So I think that would fit with some of what you're saying, that we are moving into a level of consciousness beyond our wildest imagination.
I think so, absolutely, and that could come in so quickly with Uranus. It could burn away almost. It could cleanse what has gone before, and so we don't have to trudge through a decade of challenge. It could happen in a blink of an eye. Is my feeling with that strong Uranus energy. But also, of course, that wonderful interview, Heather, you did with Rory Duff, and he was talking also about that 12,000 year cycle of Earth passes through the Photon Belt every 12,000 years, give or take 500, which is linking in with the shifts in consciousness that you're talking about. I mean, that was just wonderful, that synchronicity.
Well, and it's extraordinary to realize that these movements of our solar system and the planets are guiding us through this transformational process. That if we can work with their energies consciously, then they're really supporting us in healing and transforming. But some of my sense of the Uranus-Saturn square, and you've talked about this in depth also, is that tension between trying to cling to the old forms and the old paradigms rather than moving into the new ways of being. And that Uranus is really guiding us to let go of those old patterns. And Saturn in Aquarius at its best is helping us move into those new Aquarian forms. Yeah. But if we're caught in the tension of that square, then I think it's part of what we're seeing in world events this week with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, this effort to cling to power and the power over paradigm and hold on to the forms of the past, which is part of the turbulence on the planet right now.
Absolutely spot on. And of course, it's so human, isn't it, to want to cling to something that's known, that we've known all through our lifetimes as foundational structures, and we've trusted, and there's such an instinct. It's the first law of wing walking: don't let go of what you're hanging on to till you're hanging on to something else. Whereas Uranus is asking us to fly, to step off that wing into the invisible, into the unknown, and just trust your frequency, trust your level of consciousness. And that can feel extremely scary, because the future seems to be more invisible than it's ever been before. We've always had such predictable lives. You go to school, you go to college, you do well, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house, blah, 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 blah. It's been quite predictable in that way. Now, that's all up for grabs, I think, in terms of our life structure, and also the whole process of Pluto, grinding its inexorable way through Capricorn. That's about revealing any corruption in top-down structures that is not for our highest good, of the highest integrity. And so things are going to be revealed that cause those structures to crack. And almost imagine a kind of very tall building, but the foundations are just being eroded right now. And Jupiter-Neptune is going to help that erosion too, to kind of wash away the old. And so therefore the whole lot is going to come down within the coming months and next few years, I think. And therefore, what are we going to create? And it really is down to us. And I think that can feel scary, but it can also feel enormously empowering, that we are going to create it. We are creating it in every moment. We're just so unaware of it. And I think what these times are really encouraging us to do, as you said at the beginning, Heather, is to find our mastery, to know that we are more powerful than we've ever believed, and to start to manifest. And I think particularly with that upcoming Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, our manifesting abilities are really going to accelerate. I mean, you're a master at this, because it wasn't your thesis in sort of mysticism versus psychosis. I mean, that's so Jupiter-Neptune. I mean, would you like to share that as well, your perspective?
Yes, and what's interesting in that research that I did is that the difference between mysticism and psychosis is the capacity to be grounded so that you can integrate that expanding consciousness. Otherwise, it tends to destabilize you and overwhelm you, and then you get caught in distortions and imbalances with it. So I think that's part of what's critical in this time, is that we really stay grounded. And you and I both talk a lot about the importance of that connection with nature and being in tune with the earth as she's in her transformational process. But I also think, like you're saying, that Jupiter Neptune conjunction can also be guiding us to have trust, to have faith. I love that Hopi saying that talks about let go of the shore, be in the current, let the current carry you. That I feel like this is a time where we need to trust these larger energies, the cosmic consciousness that's guiding us, and flow with that rather than trying to be in control or trying to know where we're headed. Because it is a time, a liminal time, where everything is uncertain and unknown.
I mean, that is so true. And that's such a beautiful image, isn't it, for Jupiter Neptune being in the water, in the flow of what's coming in, that is potentially just very high frequency energy. I mean, this is almost angelic. It's beautiful energy. And it's such an opportunity, because it only happens in Pisces, as we know, every 166 years. So, we've got to optimize that. We've got to kind of jump on the paddle boat, as it were, and just see where that takes us. And yes, it can feel scary, but I think deep in our souls, we know that the old is a done deal. It's just fossilized, I think. It's calcified. I mean, that's very much Saturn, isn't it? And, we really know deep down, with these desperate grasps for power, last gasp and grasp on power, and land grabs that are sort of happening this week, etc., we can see it's just old stuff. It's old energy. It's just replaying. I mean, what's happened this week and where the planets are, it's got a kind of eerie echo of the beginning of World War II, because Mars in that chart, 1st of September 1939, I think it's 4:45 a.m. Danzig, when the first shot was fired for World War II. Mars is in late Capricorn, 27 of Capricorn, so it's been very activated by current Venus, Mars, Pluto right now. And at that time also, we had the nodes in Taurus, Scorpio, and we had Uranus in Taurus. So that there's some interesting.
Fascinating.
We have to broadcast peace right now. We have to broadcast peace because this is just old top-down stuff. I mean, Capricorn is so much about top-down power, isn't it? People in elite positions kind of running the world. And that is something that I think that people are discovering is quite hollow, and discovering that in these times of great destabilization, we have to come back to center. We have to have, as you're talking about grounding, Heather, we have to have our bare feet on the earth, bare feet on the ground, connecting with Gaia. I think Gaia, we can suck up more powerful antioxidants than any vitamins you can take. It's an incredible antioxidant to suck up all those healing negative ions, but also knowing that we are our center, we are our anchor, and developing some spiritual practice that can take you to that place of warmth in moments. And whether that's breath work, candle gazing, whatever, hugging a tree, whatever it is, have a practice that can get you there in moments, because that's going to be priceless, I think, this year.
I totally agree. And another piece of it that I think is important, and again, part of what Rory Duff talks about, is how the Earth's ley lines, the energies on the Earth, are really ramping up, and that can expand our consciousness, but it also can intensify the emotional states that we're in. So that if we are caught in fear or caught in despair, that is intensifying right now. So I think, like you're saying, it makes it so critical that we not only do what we can to be centered and to be opening to that expanding consciousness, but that we also, I also believe, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, that the intensity of the light coming onto the planet and the energies impacting us are bringing to consciousness whatever is unresolved. So that in our individual lives, whatever we may have suppressed and been able to keep a lid on is up and needing to be dealt with. Globally, I think we're seeing that. The issues that need to be resolved, the trauma that needs to be healed. So I think that's a big piece of this time also, is facing those things that have been in the shadows to allow them to come to the light of consciousness, to heal, so that we can transform in this time.
Yeah, I mean, beautifully said, and so true, because it's absolutely, as you say, Heather, happening on a global level, and it's very much happening, of course, on an individual level, because the light is so bright. I mean, never in many lifetimes have we had such intensity of photonic light pouring in, as we know from Rory Duff's work, etc. So, I mean, in a way, as humans, we don't stand a chance, because we're sandwiched between the Earth, which is going through her own upgrade, and all this photonic light that's kind of upgrading every cell in our body at speed. So we're having to adjust as little kind of human entities and energy fields so quickly, hence all the physical symptoms of the dizziness, insomnia, ear ringing, aches and pains. But it is evidence of such strong evolutionary energy. So I think, going back to your thesis, it's so interesting, isn't it, that we have to be able to accommodate more light and hold more light in our bodies with this extra opportunity of all this photonic light. And as I understand it, the photons actually stick to our electrons. And if your level of consciousness is high enough, your frequency is high enough, you can hang on to that, as it were. You can hold a higher percentage of light in the body. But if it isn't, then it's just even wilder for you. The intensity, you can't accommodate, you can't incorporate, and it's even more dizzying, if you like, and head spinning. So again, going back to your thesis, this is, and I see that in the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, exactly in April, that it's going to split two ways, don't you? It's either, you're either going to be on the surfboard being carried higher up the beach in your spiritual evolution, or you're just going to kind of crash and burn with the strength of the evolutionary energies that are just going to feel too much and too intense. That's my, and go deeper into psychosis and hypnosis, perhaps.
Yeah, that is my strong sense too, that this is such a choice point on the planet, individually and collectively, and that we may see that increasing. We're already seeing the polarization on the planet, but we may see that increasing division between people that are really moving into that higher consciousness and people that are going into crisis and chaos. But my hope also is, like the Peruvian shamans that I've worked with talk about, our movement into being homo luminous ones, beings of light. And that if enough of us, even a minority of us, can hold that higher consciousness, it can shift the collective consciousness and support the others in moving through that transition in a more healing way. So I think that circles back to what you were saying before, how critical it is that we not get caught in the turbulence of this time, but really stay aligned and open and trust this light, this higher consciousness that's coming into us, and can allow us then to seed that in the collective consciousness.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that expression, homo lumens, or homo luminous.
Homo luminous ones,
Yep.
yes.
Whoa, that is such a beautiful, beautiful image, vision to aim for. And it's so exciting. And that's why I think we have to keep away from the drama. I so often talk in my videos about staying on the eagle's perch, because if we get caught up in the drama and engage emotionally and negatively, it can spin us off that path. We have to stay in that center. And it's so interesting what you were saying about it just takes a minority of us, because as I understand it, by the laws of physics, and Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about this as well, and Dr. Joe Dispenza, that it just takes, if you look at the laws of physics, it just takes 1% of a body of matter to evolve, and then the whole lot evolves through a process called downward causation. There's a kind of infection of higher frequency energy down to lower, rather than the other way around, because it's more powerful, the higher frequency energy. So as you say, Heather, it only takes a small minority of us to change the whole, And I think also with the, what we were talking about at the beginning, Uranus being stronger this year, Uranus is also the planet of truth and revelation. And I think there are going to be a lot of truths, a lot of revelations this year, partly because Uranus is strong, partly that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction can act to unveil any deceits or secrets. It can be an unveiling, falling from your eyes. And when that happens, I think people could shift their perspective and their consciousness actually pretty darn quickly. And that will create more momentum, so that more of us are moving towards the light in a bigger way. Do you feel that's the case?
Oh, I think that's beautifully said. And the other thing that I find fascinating, I mean, I have integrated some of Bernadette Brady's work with visual astrology, and it's fascinating to me that Uranus in the sky right now is between the constellation Perseus and Cetus, the whale, which I think is a very powerful part of the sky, and really speaks to that story of Perseus the warrior trying to, first he conquers Medusa, and then he tries to slay Cetus the whale in an effort to be in a position of power and control. So to me, another piece of what Uranus is guiding us in right now is to see that polarization we've been in between the energies of the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, and that this 5,000 years of patriarchal power over is needing to come to an end, and that we need to, I mean, I think Uranus is the truth teller, and that it's guiding us to step out of that polarization, to reconnect with the sacred feminine, the wisdom of the earth, the wisdom of the deep, and come back into connection with Mother Earth so that we can come back into balance.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Heather. And we were talking a little bit in our earlier conversation about some of these Kuiper Belt objects, these dwarf planets that are way out in space. And of course, there are dozens and dozens of them. We're just, I've got L plates on in sort of researching them. There's so much more to go and so much more to be discovered. But all of them so far have this reverence for the sacredness of the earth, this absolute reverence that the earth has so much wisdom, it has all the natural medicine to heal us, it has its own natural cycles, that there's so much magic in the earth that we've just kind of desecrated really in our so-called sophisticated civilization, that it was just there for our exploitation, not for our honoring. And one of the aspects I love of these Kuiper Belt objects that I've investigated so far is they have such an honor and a shamanic connection and a reverence for the earth, sacred traditions, ancestors, indigenous land. I mean, it's just beautiful. So that's the promise, I think, as part of New Earth. And that also brings in, I would think, the divine feminine to be highlighted more fully.
Absolutely, because the divine feminine is really that understanding that everything is sacred and everything is interconnected, and that we can come back into that harmonic, right relationship with all of life. And you talk beautifully about astrology and sacred geometry and the music of the spheres. And I think that's part of what these planetary energies are calling us back into, is to be back in tune with the harmony of the spheres, and to step out of the ways we've been in such a discordant way of being in relationship with cosmic consciousness, with the earth, with each other.
Yeah, that's just really wonderful. And I've even, I don't know if you've heard them, Heather, I've even heard recordings that people have made out in space. I don't know whether NASA has done this, but recordings have been out in space, and you actually hear harmony, you hear music. And whether that's coming from the movements of the planets or their frequencies or whatever, I mean, there's so much still to discover with that. But I think what's very interesting, thinking about not just the geometry between the planets, but we know that if we're in higher states of being, if we're in love or joy or whatever, that our energy is more coherent. And when we're in coherent energy and higher consciousness, the effect we have on the plasma around us is more coherent as well. And therefore the reality we're creating is more harmonious. And, I'm almost thinking that there's a symmetry, if you like, to the architectural structure of energy. I don't know where this is coming from, that we're creating with our coherence through our high consciousness. And therefore that comes back to meet us as our reality, as something beautiful and not destructive. There's something in plasma which I don't understand very well, but I'm getting very interested, that our consciousness absolutely affects plasma, and the geometry of the plasma is affected by our emotions and our thinking. And if we get an understanding of that bit, then we've kind of got a science to see how a better reality is echoed back to us. Am I making any sense?
Oh, that is brilliant. I mean, that is brilliant. And it so resonates with Emoto's work, where
Yes.
he looked at how people's emotions and thoughts and intentions could change the crystalline structure of water. So I think that's actually brilliant. And I think what you're saying that's so important is that, some of what I think is sad is we actually don't understand our true history as humans on this planet, that we have been in ancient times in much higher states of consciousness. I mean, that's part of what the Hindu Yuga cycles talk about, and that we're coming out of an age of ignorance. We're coming out of a time of forgetting what we're capable of. And I think what you're describing so beautifully is we're coming back into remembrance of our capacity to be in this higher state of consciousness and then co-create new ways of being and a new earth.
And I mean, that really beautiful, because although it's going to be a time of a lot of turbulence and instability, it will force some of us, I think, into recognizing that kind of mastery. And that power that we've forgotten. And when you and I talked last week, we were talking about those ancient civilizations, which were so evolved compared to where we are now. I mean, I saw a documentary some time ago where they were trying to replicate the building of at Machu Picchu, all the Inca building there. And even with diamond and laser cutters, they said they couldn't do it so well. Equally with the pyramids in Egypt, that those stones weren't rolled with slaves in a wheel. It was probably levitation. It's way beyond, and the precision with which those pyramids align to the cosmos, as we know, Heather, from all your investigations into that. I mean, we could barely do that now in the 21st century. So how much have we lost, and how much, as you say, is there to remember of the power of those times, and all they know that they knew about healing, and the resonance with the earth, and the way the pyramids have actually been placed on the earth as well. I mean, that's we could go down a very deep rabbit hole there, but I know you know a great deal about that because you've researched that whole area a lot. Tell us about some of that.
Well, as like you're saying, it's just so fascinating that the pyramids were built to mirror exactly the positions of the stars in the belt of Orion, and that the star shafts in the Great Pyramid were aligned to Sirius, to Orion, to other crucial stars that are related to the precessional cycle, to be, I think, trying to give us a message encoded in stone from 10,000 BC to now, to remind us that this is a time of profound transformation. And if we can remember that and be in this process, then like you're saying, this is a turbulent time, but from my perspective, it can be like the labor pains leading to a new birth and a radically new way of being. But we need to hold that larger understanding perspective of why this is a turbulent time, but that it's actually guiding us into radically new ways of being human and a whole new earth.
And it's going to happen very quickly, as you say, Heather. If you realize and recognize that the pyramids are actually echoing the precessional cycle. I mean, supposedly those guys didn't even have a calculator, and I think it was, so how did they do all that? And I think it was when Robert Bauval was actually flying above the pyramids that he had this epiphany that they were completely mirroring the belt of Orion.
Yes, and he's also the one that did the research on the Sphinx to realize that the pattern of erosion on the Sphinx makes the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid much earlier in terms of their construction than we have believed. And again, I think we keep trying to, unfortunately, in our modern times, push things into this perspective of history that's really distorted. But he's very clear that the Sphinx, again, these ancient cultures had such a profound understanding of astronomy and of these larger cycles. And the Sphinx was built facing the east at the beginning of the age of Leo, so that the lion in the sky is mirrored with the lion on the earth. And that understanding of being in connection with the energies of the sky and the attunement of the earth and the cosmos is just so profound. And we've, unfortunately, in modern times forgotten so much of that. But I think that's what's coming back to us.
Yeah, that is so exciting, and I think it was the work of Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, wasn't it, that enabled them to predate the building of the pyramids to much earlier than we've understood in our history, because the people who built the pyramids, and there may have even been extraterrestrial beings, you know, that's very likely, but they were using astrology, astronomy, and astrology as a universal language to alert us in our modern times of what is possible. Wow, I think that's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. I mean, and you look at sites like Göbekli Tepe that's been discovered, and sites in ancient, civilizations in Peru, all with these sites that are in alignment with certain stars and mirroring certain star configurations to try to be giving us messages for this time. But it's also very clear in ancient Egypt, ancient Peru, other parts of the world, that they understood how to work with light and with energies in ways that we've forgotten. And again, you're talking so much about the light impacting us now. I think that's going to be some of what comes back to us also, that awareness of the ways that we can work with light for healing as well as for enlightenment.
Absolutely wonderful. And there's such a sense, isn't there, Heather, with those ancient peoples that they had a complete sense of interconnectedness with the cosmos, with the earth, with nature. And again, we've lost that. You know, there's been such a sense of separation in our modern lives, and it's so exciting to think that we can reconnect, we can remember back to all that glorious interconnectedness. And I was just listening to the new documentary, the Changing of the Gods. Don't know if you've listened to that. And I think it was Richard Tarnas, who was talking about each of us is just a fractal expression of the cosmos. I mean, wow. You know, that's just so exciting. We're a unique divine spark, but we're a fractal of the cosmos. I just
That's beautiful. And I love how Brian Swim, do you know his work? The
no.
cosmologist. He talks very much about that same thing, and that, from that understanding of physics now, the center of the universe is in all that is. So we are not only just a fractal of this cosmic consciousness, but we need to come back to that sense of the center within us that can connect to the center of all that is and realize that interconnectedness. And I think the ancient cultures also were more right brain dominant. So they really were more open to those intuitive ways of knowing and ways of communicating telepathically and being much more in communion with the consciousness of the cosmos and of the life around them. And that, too, just from my background as a neuropsychologist, I think we're moving back more into left brain, right brain balance again, and out of those left brain ways of thinking that keep us disconnected and wanting to feel in control and able to see things as separate from us. But the other piece that you're talking about that I think is profound is the Heart Math Institute research about we need to get out of the brain and back to the heart. And that brings us back into coherence and balance and opens other ways of knowing. And you talk about that a lot in your work.
Yeah, I love their work because they now have evidence that not only does the heart send much more information to the brain, but I understand the toroidal field, the energy field of the heart, is something like 5,000 times stronger than that of the brain. It may be even more than that. And so this is where we've got to come back to. And as you were saying, Heather, you know, if we're in our center, we can connect to the rest of nature and the earth and the cosmos. But if we're not in our center, if we're kind of scattered and spun off, that's going to become much more difficult. And that's why even that simple breathwork technique of imagining that you're breathing in and out through the heart is again so stabilizing and centering. But as I understand it, the photonic light is also activating and energizing the higher heart. So it's opening up this whole area. And particularly with the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction that we're now in, really, because it's such porous energy, isn't it? Pisces, we're kind of into it already because they're co-present in Pisces. I think there will be much greater psychic sensitivity, telepathy with animals, telepathy with plants, all of nature. There'll be this kind of harmonizing, blending, flowing, that we just see ourselves as a piece of flow almost of nature, rather than this rigid separate identity. But with that comes so much joy that nature will kind of be absolutely iridescent. It will be so powerfully full of life force in a way that was always there, but we just couldn't see it because our consciousness wasn't at the right place. And that's what I think this whole time we're moving into will help us to really understand and feel. It's feeling in the body. It's getting out of the head and feeling in the body, isn't it? Do you feel that, Heather?
Yes, absolutely. And part of what you're talking about with that Piscean energy that we're in is I do think the veils between the worlds are thinner right now. And that part of what's we're having to adjust to is there's more fluidity in terms of our own consciousness and the collective consciousness. So I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've tracked my dreams for years, and it's been really interesting to feel in the last year or so. My dreams are no longer about my own psychological processing. I often am feeling like I'm in the soup of the collective consciousness. And a lot of the clients that I work with talk about having more psychic experiences and attuning more to energies in other realms. That I think all of that's opening up for us and will expand more with Jupiter in conjunction with Neptune. But it can also be confusing for people to be feeling that increasing uh, loosening of the boundaries of our own sense of individuality. Do you
Yeah, and that's,
experience that at all?
yeah. Yes, I do. And that's perfectly said, the loosening of the boundaries, because of course Saturn is our boundaries, isn't it? It's our tight definition of, this is me and this is my job title and this is where I live, bricks and mortar. And all of that is kind of up for grabs, but happening very quickly. And of course, Uranus is leading us out to the galactic, and certainly a lot of people I know are having more and more galactic contacts and channeling galactic beings, which is really exciting. And yes, my dreams have certainly become much more vivid, long, extraordinary, and not personal, as you say, but also a lot of third eye activation, a lot of kind of fireworks going, and pin sharp images that come in way better than my own eyesight, pin sharp images that often come through in the dreams, but I know it's happening here. And again, I think that's down to the photonic light, which is activating the DNA and the pineal gland and really shifting us from carbon back to crystalline. And I think of this combination of both Uranus and Jupiter-Neptune conjunction as crystalline, because it's so high frequency, that kind of combination, isn't it? And that, because it's happening so quickly, that's how it feels so exciting. It feels so exciting to jump on that paddleboard and yeah, I'm just going to go on the adventure of a lifetime. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just going to jump on it because I'm going to trust the universe.
Well, and like you're saying, it can be so exhilarating and so beautiful to experience that expansion of the pineal gland and to open to these other ways of seeing and knowing. And I do think our DNA is being radically shifted by these energies. So it's impacting us on every level, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so if we can open to the meaning of this time, it's actually exhilarating.
It really is. And that's a great word for Uranus as well, isn't it? And, it's so interesting, isn't it, Heather, that when things in life are uncertain and destabilized, our instinct is always to hang on to what we know. But we know from that strong Saturn-Uranus square and also Pluto moving through Capricorn, that's absolutely the last thing we have to do, because the universe is saying it's done. It's old energy, it's old ways of being. You know, you must kind of move on and jump on this wave. But it's so kind of counterintuitive for us as humans to let go of everything. We may have to let go of our work, our homes, our identity, our so-called job title, who have we been, and just step into the invisible. You know, like the fool in the tarot. And that's why I think if you can link with like-minded people as well, where you're all stepping off a cliff at the same time, that can be a very strengthening and supportive experience, that you're not completely alone, because that's very Aquarian, isn't it? Finding your group online or in person.
Well, I think what you're saying is that too often the instinct when we're in such uncertain times is to try to have a sense of control, or to cling to the old patterns of the past, or to look for someone to rescue us, to look for someone in a position of leadership or power to make it all okay, to stabilize it again. And I think that is, as you're saying, such a profound theme of the Aquarian age, is it has to come from us. We need to be in that change process individually, and then connecting with each other in community to collaborate and co-create new ways of being. And I think then we will see the change unfold. But we are the ones we've been waiting for, as the Hopi would say, that we can't look for that solution outside of ourselves. It has to come from within us.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really partly the message of Pluto moving through these last few degrees of Capricorn. We've always looked to an authority figure, to a top-down leader to tell us what to do or to rescue us. And those days are done, really. But it is very empowering to think that we can step into that role of being co-creators in a much bigger way. And I know, Heather, in your work, you talk quite a lot about Sedna. And I'd love to hear a little more about Sedna, because I haven't done a lot of research at all into Sedna, what part Sedna plays in this whole picture. Because she's got around about 12,000 year, 11.5, 12,000 year orbit. Is that correct?
Well, that's what's fascinating. And like you, I'm really fascinated with these newly discovered Kuiper Belt objects and these outer planets that I think are really bringing us this new consciousness. And Sedna is extraordinary in that she has an 11,400 year orbit, but she's got a very elliptical orbit, such that she goes as far out as the farthest reaches of the Oort cloud, where she's communing with other star systems. And then she comes in close to our solar system, which is where she is now. So around every 11,000, 12,000 years, she comes in closer to our solar system and signals to us when we're in these times of shift, when we're in these times of earth change and shifts in consciousness. So I really see her as guiding us through these larger cycles of human history. And she's associated with the Inuit goddess, who I don't know if you know that, I'm sure you know that story. It's an incredibly beautiful story of this young maiden on a spiritual journey who goes through her own dissolution process to merge and become the goddess of the sea and connect with all that is. And I think that is what we're being guided into. And I think, as you said, with Pluto, part of what we need to remember is Pluto is the energy of alchemy. Yeah. That it is burning away what no longer serves us to enable us to move into a new form. That it is guiding us again in the understanding that the ancient cultures had, that we've forgotten, that when you go through a rite of passage, you let go of all that's been. You allow that old identity to die. But then you need to go through a liminal period, a period of not knowing what's next. And that's the time of transformation, that's the period when the caterpillar's in the chrysalis to then emerge as the butterfly. So I think Pluto is guiding us to burn away the patterns and systems of the past and to be willing, and I think Jupiter and Neptune are helping us with that, to be in the not knowing and to then know that the new will emerge. And that's where you and I talk a lot about 2025, the end of 2024, 2025 as a critical transition time. That to me is really signaled by Pluto's full movement into Aquarius. And we both know that Rory Duff talks about the Earth's energy lines coming into harmonic coherence in December 2024. So this is the new life that we can move into, this new world, a new way of being in 2025, if we allow ourselves to go through this time of not knowing and being in the metamorphosis that we're in.
And of course, so many of the outer planets are moving or shifting sign at that time, aren't they, Heather? You know, Pluto is fully in Aquarius, as you say. Neptune is starting to move into Aries. Uranus is now moving out of Taurus into Gemini. So we're moving into much more kind of air fire period, which is super quickly. But just going back to Sedna, what you were saying was so interesting, because her elliptical orbit, where she's way out in space near the Oort cloud, presumably she is then coming back close to Earth as she is at the moment to bring in new information. And also the photonic light and energy, light carries information. So again, this is new information from the galaxy that we haven't had probably in around 12,000 years, if ever. So this new information is seeding something in us that we may not even be cognizant of, but it's happening. That process is happening. And
beautifully said. Yes, beautifully said. And I also think, that she is reminding us that because she goes so far out to the Oort cloud and to connecting it to other star systems, I think she's also reminding us of what Dane Rudhyar talked about in this time, that we're meant to be gaining a galactic consciousness, that we're meant to see ourselves as a part of the cosmos and not be so limited in our view of who we are as humans on this planet, in this solar system, that we are part of this cosmic consciousness that is through all that is. And I think Sedna speaks to that and tries to remind us of that.
Yeah, beautiful. And then when Uranus moves fully into Gemini in 2026, that symbolism is galactic communication, isn't it? Uranus in Gemini, galactic communication. But even Uranus in Taurus is about bringing the galactic down to Earth. And that's part of the process I think we're in at the moment. And yeah, I mean, it's just so exciting with these new energies. And as you and I have spoken, Heather, I think they're really only discovered when we're ready to assimilate them into our consciousness. And this is a whole new level of consciousness that we're just barely beginning to explore right now. But it's there, we're right on the cusp of that. And that's why that work is so exciting.
And tell me, I know we've talked some about this before, but tell me more about your sense of the meaning of heiress. And the fact that she's squaring Pluto right now.
Yep, and was all through 2020, 2021, yes. Continues all through this year as well, because I think it's different from how you see her. And Eris, I very much see as sister of Mars, warrior energy. Obviously, the myth is around her not being invited to the wedding, so she turned up anyway and created mayhem, like throwing the golden apple and, for the fairest, and everybody argued over who was the fairest that supposedly started the Trojan War. So therefore, to me, she represents the feisty street fighter, but somebody who really stands for total inclusion of everyone. Everyone's voice has to be heard. No injustice, no excommunication of a sector of society to the periphery because they're not good enough or don't have the right XYZ. So I love Eris in that she stands up for everyone in society. And of course, in that clash, that square to Pluto, Pluto being top-down authority of rules and regulations, etc. I love her principle and what she's helped us achieve so far, because it's like an echo. That Eris Pluto square to me is like another level of the Saturn-Uranus square. A lot of it is about, control versus freedom, and equality versus inequality, and is it going to be kind of top down or much more horizontal social structure, which is I think what we're moving to. So both Uranus and Eris, and I think they have very similar symbolism, have got a big role to play in this shift to new Earth. But Heather, talk about your take on Eris, because you call her Xena, I think.
Yeah, which was her original name from the astronomer Mike Brown, who discovered her. But I think at core, I love your description of her just then, because I think at core we see her in very similar ways, because she is the rebel, she is radical. I love how Uranus as a planet doesn't even fit astronomers' understanding of how planets should function. It's the way that it moves, and the fact that its south pole facing the sun is less hot than its equator. I mean, there's so many things about it that don't make sense. And Eris is also a rule breaker, in that most of the planets are on the path of the ecliptic, and she's 44 degrees off. So I think, like Uranus, she's also guiding us to be willing to step out of the conventional ways of doing things, to be willing to follow our own unique path, and to know that collectively we're moving in radically new directions. But part of my little bit different take on her is that she is the planet that led to that whole controversy around how do you define a planet, and is Pluto a planet? And I think that she stirred up so much disturbance and turbulence among astronomers because she is so different. She doesn't fit the conventional mold. And I think that she also represents the energy of the sacred feminine that many of these new planets are helping us connect with again. But it creates turbulence in the old paradigms and in the patriarchal perspective. So then she gets named Eris, goddess of strife and discord, which I think is the way that we often perceive those who threaten our paradigms and our old belief systems. But I think her deeper understanding is everyone needs to follow their own path. And as you said, we need to be, and that's some of the Aquarian theme, accepting the diversity of all that is and finding the beauty in that, the excitement of that uniqueness that we each bring and the diversity that we bring culturally, rather than trying to fit everyone into a box and some normative way of being.
Yeah, just so well said, Heather. Really beautiful, because so often I've been asked, and I'm sure you have too, when we're thinking about the Aquarius energy, well, doesn't that mean there's a kind of all-pervasive homogeneity to society? Well, if you follow the dystopian timeline, yep, for sure, that's where you're going to end up. But at a higher level of expression, this is about finding your uniqueness in an even higher expression than you've ever done before. So your unique contribution can be even greater. You can stand more strongly in your light than you've ever done before to contribute to the whole. So there isn't any sense of kind of flattening out in the higher expression of Aquarius. Quite the contrary, it's a heightening of your uniqueness, of your individuality, to enable you to come back and really feed your contribution back to the whole. And yeah, I love the way you talk about Xena. That's really exciting. I love the rule breaker. I love it, because we've got to do that in this shift of paradigms and ages, haven't we? And I love things that kind of challenge the old order. I think I'm quite revolutionary, actually, but I sort of, with a polite English accent, but
But you have a strong Uranus in your chart, so absolutely, yes.
yeah, I do. So I just think that's where we're headed. That we can't we shouldn't resist that that impetus to get us to a much better place, which is absolutely agree 100% about becoming galactic citizens once more, because we're made of stardust. I mean, even our English professor Brian Cox, who isn't a fan of astrology, says that we are all made of stardust. I mean, that's where we've come from. That's our ancestry. We just are not very cognizant of it, but we will remember.
So as we close, let's just share a few thoughts about how people can really work to be in that centered place and hold that higher consciousness in this time. And something you just said, I think, is a real key, that my sense is that it's critical that we not resist the energies of these planets, that they are calling us through a period of change and turbulence, but it's in an effort to guide us, as you're saying, into a whole new way of being and form of consciousness and a new paradigm. So it's about trusting that and coming back to the heart, coming back to center, staying grounded. But what else would you add that people can do to be navigating this turbulent time and trusting what is unfolding?
Yes, I think really to see it with excitement, as you've been talking, Heather, rather than kind of eek, see it, what's collapsing. So know that it is meant to collapse. The astrology is terribly reassuring and helpful. Know that the 3D old world is meant to collapse. So don't worry and panic about that. Say, yep, there we go. Astrology gives me a great perspective. Yep, there we go, another thing that's collapsed. And that's very helpful to avoid the anxiety, I think. So feel excited about what's coming. And secondly, as I mentioned earlier, I would find simple, free, everyday ways to find your center. Hugging a tree, hugging a child, hugging a pet, meditating, watching your breath, candle gazing, something that's absolutely elementary, listening to the bird song, listening to the silence beyond the bird song. Free, instant, available. What can you do in a moment to bring you back to center and bliss, and actually just following your breath and being aware of just very slowly extending the out breath, and maybe even pausing momentarily at the end of the out breath before you start, and make the breath very soft and gentle. That within moments reduces your cortisol level and boosts your immunity. We can all do that. We all breathe. And the breath is the connection between the mind and the body. And yoga is the word for union, I believe, between the mind and the body, but the breath is the connector. So coming back to the breath, I think, is so important. And the third thing I would add, which I often talk about, if possible, find a like-minded tribe, a like-minded group, online, in person. That is so strengthening for you, that it reduces, again, any anxiety of feeling alone as whatever is collapsing around you. And a much greater, it's easy to be strong if there's several of you being strong together. It's much easier because you come together, we're holding hands digitally and physically across the world. We're holding hands in this, goosebumpy now, spiritual wave of evolution that we're going through. And I think that is a hugely helpful human connection, which will be very powerful at this time too, very Aquarian.
Oh, beautifully said. And it really reminds me, and this is an image that came to me in a shamanic journey also, that sense that there is a web, a healing web of energy and light forming around the globe. And that as we hold that light within us, we can connect with those other light workers around the planet and support each other and support being in attunement with the earth as we shift into this new earth, new way of being.
Wow. I mean, that is so exciting. It's beautiful to hear you talk about that. And our connection, that was a frequency connection. Find your family of frequency. and that will help to sustain you, I think, is a very big part of this. It's all, we're really, it always has been, but we haven't been aware that everything is energy and frequency, everything. We're going to become much more aware of it as we shift from being less particle and more wave in our very state of being. And that's an exciting journey.
Well, thank you so much, Pam, for being in this conversation. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing on the planet and the light and energy of love that you're holding and the way in which you're being of service in this time. Thank you.
Oh, bless you. Equally, Heather, you are doing your piece of the puzzle with so much light and love from where you are in the US too, you know. So I feel that, you know, I feel that coming across the Atlantic. So that is so strengthening for people as well. So bless you, and I'm just delighted to have had this opportunity to share with you.
Oh, well, thank you. I also want to thank everyone who has shared in this conversation today, and for all of you who are also trying to hold the energy of light and love in these turbulent times. May we continue to support each other in this profound time of transition and transformation. Blessed be.